tears streamed down Amara's face, hot and relentless. As she stood beneath the warm glow of the garden lights, her world unraveling in slow, surreal motion. The laughter and clinking of champagne glasses around her faded into a distant hum. Almost dreamlike, as she watched David herd David down on one knee. But the ring he held wasn't for her. The promises she once believed in weren't for her. They were for Kemi, her best friend, her sister in all but blood. The cheers erupted as Kemi gasped, hands covering her mouth in mock surprise, then nodded, with giddy excitement. A glittering diamond slid onto her finger as camera phones flashed and guests erupted into applause. Amara stood frozen, invisible in a sea of celebration, unable to move, unable to breathe. She had come to this upscale garden party expecting an evening of elegance and wine, not betrayal and heartbreak. Her chest ached with a grief so sharp it felt like it might split her in two. But it was the look David gave her, a brief, detached glance across the crowd that truly broke her. No remorse, no hesitation, just cold indifference after 6 years. After all the shared dreams, the quiet promises, the whispered plans of forever, he chose Kemi. A single sob escaped her, swallowed quickly by the night, as she turned and slipped away from the scene. No one stopped her, no one noticed. Her heels clicked softly against the stone path as she walked, each step an effort to hold herself together, to not collapse under the weight of humiliation and heartbreak. Her vision blurred with tears, but she kept going, refusing to fall apart in front of strangers. She made it through the gates, out into the chaotic heartbeat of Lagos, her body moving on autopilot as her mind screamed. Behind her, as the music swelled and laughter grew louder, she caught one final think, Imi's voice, high-pitched and bubbling with joy. She'll be fine. Amara's always been the strong one. That stopped her, just for a second. Her breath caught in her throat as those words cut deeper than the proposal ever could. Always the strong one. Always expected to swallow her pain, to rise, to move on. But this time, something inside her cracked. This time, she wasn't sure she wanted to be strong. Amara had always been the dependable one, the anchor, the steady flame in any storm. Ambitious but soft-spoken, she wore her kindness like a second skin. At 28, she had built a quiet, respectable life for herself as a pharmacist at a government hospital in Lagos. Her days were long and often thankless, filled with patients who came in with more sorrow than hope. But she showed up every single day, offering care and calm, because that's what her mother had taught her. Hold the home together. Whether it was a home, a workplace, or a relationship, Amara believed in showing up, in giving her all even when it hurt. She had given everything to David. 6 years of unwavering love, emotional labor, and belief. She was there when his startup was just an idea scribbled in a notebook, when no one else saw the vision but her. She'd helped him organize pitch decks, kept him fed through sleepless nights, lent him money when his rent was overdue, and more than that. She gave him the kind of stability he said he'd never known, loyalty, warmth, a future. He used to call her his safe place. She held on to that like it meant something. Then there was Kemi, her best friend, since they were 2 girls chasing mangoes in their compound yard. Stylish, magnetic, and always just a little chaotic, Kemi was the one who made every room brighter and more dangerous. Amara had picked her up after drunken fights with her father, stood by her through her parents' messy divorce, even let her crash in her apartment when Kemi's love life blew up in flames, which was often. Amara loved her like a sister, trusted her like one too. Never once had she imagined she'd have to unlearn that dot now. Just days after the garden party, Amara sat at her pharmacy desk, her white coat pristine, her hands moving on muscle memory, as she filled prescriptions and offered tired smiles. Outside, Lagos roared, as always, chaotic, vibrant, alive, but inside, she felt muted, emptied. Her world had cracked in places no one could see. On the surface, she looked composed, like nothing had changed. But inside, everything had. Her phone buzzed, constantly messages she refused to open. Some from mutual friends who didn't know what to say. Others from those who pretended they didn't see the betrayal playing out in real time on social media. Instagram was a minefield now. Each scroll a fresh wound. David and Kemi beaming at pre-wedding shoots. Champagne toasts, hashtags, like #forever, started here, mocking her silently. No one had called. No one had taken her side. Everyone was suddenly neutral. Amara deleted the photos, blocked their accounts. She even considered deleting her own, but that felt like letting them win. Still, she couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't stop replaying David's cold stare or Kemi's delighted laugh. It played on loop in her mind, that moment of betrayal, until she barely recognized herself in the mirror. Where had her softness gone, her certainty? She wasn't angry yet, just hollow. Like someone had pressed pause on her life and she didn't know how to hit play again. She went to work. She smiled at patients. She answered colleagues with her usual warmth. But something was different now. Her laughter didn't rise as easily. Her eyes didn't shine the way they used to. The weight she carried was invisible but suffocating. Then one afternoon, as she handed a woman her medication, an elderly patient who'd been coming for months and always asked about Amara's fine boyfriend, there was a pause. The woman's eyes lingered on Amara's face longer than usual, searching. And then, in a voice low but firm, she said, "Don't let anyone rewrite your story." The words pierced through Amara like light in a dark room. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Something inside her stirred, something she thought had withered completely. Not anger, not forgiveness, just the tiniest flicker of self, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. Weeks had passed since the garden party, but the pain hadn't dulled it, had simply shifted. Tucked beneath the rhythm of Amara's day-to-day life, like a buried shard. She had begun to function again, responding to messages, showing up to work with something that resembled normalcy, even laughing on occasion. But beneath the surface, she was still nursing wounds too deep to name. So when the email arrived late, one night, subject line stark and chilling, "Ask David where the money went," she thought. For a moment, it must be spam, some cruel prank, until she opened the attachment. Her breath caught as she scrolled through the screenshots. Bank transactions from the joint savings account she and David had once opened together, back when they were planning for a future. Transactions she hadn't authorized, hadn't even noticed, buried between hospital shifts and emotional exhaustion. But the numbers were unmistakable. Transfers, withdrawals, all leading to a shadowy corporate name she didn't recognize. And the worst part, her own name signed electronically for access permissions. Her identity, her account, her money. She barely slept. The next morning, hands trembling, Amara went straight to the bank, clutching printed copies of the screenshots like they might vanish if she looked away. The manager greeted her politely, offered tea, but his expression shifted the moment he reviewed the documents. A few clicks, a few passwords later, and her worst fears solidified into fact. David had used her. Information had impersonated her to siphon over 6 million from their shared savings over the last year. The shell company was real, but inactive. A front, a lie. Her body felt numb as the truth settled in her bones. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was theft, fraud, a calculated violation that went beyond heartbreak into something colder, more brutal. She left the bank in a daze, the city around her suddenly too loud, too fast. Her heart pounded in her chest, not with sorrow this time, but with disbelief, with rage. She called David immediately. No greeting, no preamble. We need to talk. About the money. There was a pause, then a click. He hung up. She stared at the phone for a long time, bile rising in her throat. Then, hesitating only a moment, she called Kemi. Straight to voicemail. No surprise. Minutes later, her phone buzzed. A message from Kemi. No apology, no denial. Asterisk, you think this is about money. You were always the placeholder. Asterisk, the words hit her like a slap. So this was what it had always been. Not just a love triangle, not just betrayal, but a plan. An erasure. They hadn't just moved on, they had rewritten her entirely. Used her heart, her loyalty, and now her identity. Then tossed her aside like she'd never mattered. The tears didn't come this time. Only stillness. A sharp, quiet clarity. This was no longer personal. This was no longer about heartbreak or who wore the ring. This was about dignity, about justice. She had lost her relationship, her best friend, her peace of mind, but she refused to lose her name, her worth. As she stared at the message one last time, something inside her shifted. No more silence, no more pretending. If they thought she would crumble, they had forgotten who raised her. Amara stood slowly, a storm beginning to rise in her chest. This wasn't just betrayal. It was warranted this time. She would fight back. The day Amara walked into the police station to report David for fraud, she felt like she was betraying a version of herself, the woman who once believed love was enough, who had stood by him through sleepless nights and empty bank accounts. Now she sat across from a wary-looking officer who barely glanced up as she explained the transactions, the stolen identity, the forged permissions. When she finally finished, the man sighed, his tone matter-of-fact, but the account was joint, and all the transactions were authorized digitally with your name. Amara stared at him, stunned. He used my name. Without my knowledge. The officer shrugged. Then it's your word against his, unless you want to take it to court. She left the station feeling smaller than ever. Every door she knocked on was the same. Lawyers turned her away politely, explaining that unless she could prove coercion or submit to a public case, it was nearly impossible to pursue. No one wanted to go against a rising tech founder unless the story had heat. If it goes public, one said, we might have a shot. But that also means your name, your reputation, everything on display. Amara thought of the photos still, floating around online, of David and Kemi, beaming like villains in a fairy tale. She thought of the whispers that would follow asterisk, she's still bitter. She's trying to ruin them. She should just move on. Asterisk, it wasn't just legal, it was social. It was emotional suicide. When her mother found out, the conversation was colder than she'd expected. Her mother, the woman who had taught her to endure, to be composed, to hold the home together at any cost, didn't even raise her voice. Dignity isn't cheap, Amara, she said gently. You can't fight people who have already shamed you. What will it solve? Amara wanted to scream, but she didn't. She nodded, went to her room, and spiraled. Nights became murky and slow. She started drinking small amounts of gin just to sleep, stopped answering calls, deleted messages without reading them. Her body went through motions, brushing teeth, combing hair, but her spirit was on mute. Twice, she failed to show up at the hospital without explanation. The third time, HR issued a formal warning. That was when Toby called. Toby, an old colleague from her internship days, now a quiet, principled medical lawyer, had seen her name in a private legal group chat. He reached out without judgment, just a question, asterisk, can I come by? Asterisk, he arrived with tea, not pity, and listened without interruption. When she was done, he leaned back and said simply, I'll help you, pro bono. She blinked. Why? Because even if you don't win, he said, you'll no longer be silent, and silence is how they get away with it. Something shifted in her then, a tremor of courage beneath the fear. Amara still wasn't ready to go fully public, but she started small, anonymously. She shared her story on a women's forum under a pseudonym, Just the Facts. The feelings, the betrayal. No names, no revenge. Just truth. Within days, it went viral. Women responded in droves. Not just with sympathy, with their own stories. A pattern emerged. David had never stolen from them like he had from Amara. But the emotional blueprint was the same: love bombing, manipulation, sudden withdrawal, triangulation. They described the same chill, the same hollow jokes, comparing them to other women, always to Kemi. Kemi, meanwhile, wasn't silent for long. She went on Instagram Live one night, dressed in silk, her voice dripping with performative sadness. She's jealous. She's bitter. She never supported him the way I did. She didn't know how to be fun, spontaneous. She always wanted to control him. Now she's just lashing out because she lost. Amara watched the video alone in her room, the screen casting. A cold glow across her face. She felt nothing, not anger, not sadness, just clarity. Her voice, steady and distant, narrated the moment in her head. I stopped crying the day I realized it wasn't love. It was grooming, and with that, she filed her case. Not because she believed the system would save her, not because she needed revenge, but because silence had almost broken her. And now, she was done being quiet. The courtroom buzzed with the quiet tension of spectacle. David arrived in a tailored suit, flanked by a small army of high-powered attorneys, who treated the hearing like a formality. He laughed at something one of them whispered, relaxed, smug, untouched by the weight of what was about to unfold. Amara sat beside Toby at the plaintiff's table, calm but steeled, her eyes steady, hands folded in her lap. She had imagined this moment countless times in her head, how it would feel to face him again, not as a lover or victim, but as an equal in battle. Now that it was here, she felt strangely detached, like the pain had calcified into something stronger. Resolve. David's lawyers tried to discredit her, first painting her as bitter, emotionally unstable, grasping at a narrative to mask her heartbreak. They questioned the timeline, her awareness of the transactions, her intent in going public. It was a familiar strategy: shift the focus, make the woman look hysterical, vengeful, irrational. But Toby stayed composed, letting them burn themselves out. Then he began, methodically. He laid out Amara's journals, years of entries, many times stamped around the exact dates of the fraudulent withdrawals, where she wrote about noticing financial irregularities, about feeling uneasy but unsure how to confront David. Then came the emails correspondence between her and David discussing money, investment ideas, vague references to handling it together. The receipts followed evidence of her contributions, both emotional and financial, to his startup in the early days, including small loans from her pharmaceutical side business that she'd nearly forgotten. But it was the testimonies from two other women that changed the tone of the room. They each took the stand and, though they hadn't suffered financial loss, described patterns of manipulation so eerily similar it unsettled even the judge. Their voices were calm, matter-of-fact like women who had survived something and now bore no illusions. And then came the final blow. The digital forensics expert. He confirmed that someone had accessed Amara's banking portal using her credentials. From an external IP address, traced to David's former office, remote login sessions, browser fingerprints, metadata, none of it pointed to Amara. It was precise, undeniable. Fraud, impersonation, deception. David's smirk began to fade. He leaned forward, whispered sharply to his attorney. The room shifted. When Kemi was called to testify, she simply didn't appear. No explanation, no statement, just absence. And it was louder than any defense she might have given. The judge ordered a formal note of her non-compliance, but by then, the damage was done. David looked up at Amara as if seeing her for the first time. And maybe he was, because this wasn't the woman who had once waited quietly for him to come home, who had smiled through his backhanded compliments or carried his dreams on her back. This was someone else now, someone holed up the fraud case. Was ruled in Amara's favor. The court ordered David to repay the stolen funds with interest, and his actions were formally documented as financial misconduct. But just as his lawyers were preparing to settle the damages, Toby stood again, file in hand. "There's one more matter, Your Honor." He handed the judge a copy of an old investment agreement signed years ago in the chaotic haze of startup beginnings. In it, Amara had contributed capital from her side business in exchange for equity 15%. The clause had gone dormant, never activated, buried beneath all the flash of new investors and success, but it was still valid, legally binding. The judge acknowledged it. David, pale now, looked stunned. His lawyer tried to argue expiration or oversight, but the paper spoke louder than anything else in the room. Amara didn't just win the case, she became a silent shareholder by law. David now owed her quarterly dividends. Her name would forever be attached to the company he had built off her back and tried to erase her from. Weeks later, word quietly spread that Kemi had left him. The breakup wasn't dramatic, no public spectacle, no drawn-out farewell, just a quiet post on her Instagram story. Asterisk, "I'm done with men who can't stop living in the past." Asterisk, Amara didn't smile when she saw it. She didn't gloat. She just closed the app and poured herself a glass of water. Outside her window, Lagos moved unnoisy, brilliant, indifferent. But inside, for the first time in months, Amara felt still. Not because justice had healed everything, but because she had fought. She had spoken, and most of all, because she had survived. The sun hung low over the Lagos horizon, casting golden light across the waves as they kissed the shore in rhythmic hushes. Amara sat alone on a quiet stretch of beach, her journal open on her lap, the wind teasing the pages. Around her, the world moved, gently, children's laughter in the distance, the distant call of a hawker, the scent of salt in the air. But inside her, there was only stillness, not emptiness - peace. She put pen to paper, her handwriting steady now, unhurried. Asterisk, I lost 2 people I thought I couldn't live without, but I found myself, and she's more powerful than they ever imagined. Asterisk, she paused, letting the words settle into the page like truth long overdue. Then her phone buzzed softly beside her. A message from Toby. Asterisk, asterisk, coffee later. Asterisk, asterisk, a smile touched her lips, not the kind worn to hide pain, but one that rose from somewhere deeper, lighter. She picked up the phone, glanced at the message, then quietly turned it face down beside her. No rush. No need to answer just yet. She closed her journal, let her eyes drift to the endless stretch of water, and exhaled fully. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't waiting for anything or anyone to complete her. In the quiet, her voice carried only in her thoughts. Asterisk, sometimes the betrayal isn't the end. It's the beginning. Asterisk, and with that she stood, barefoot in the sand, and walked toward the waves hole.